I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan. You may know me as a New York Times bestselling author of a book with an exploding pill on the cover, renegade psychiatrist, pole dancer, or honorary member of the Disinformation Dozen. What can I say? I'm a born provocateur. I've spent most of my recent life exposing deceptions, connecting dots, and discovering the secret places my inner victim is still waiting to be liberated. And now I feel called to help you reclaim all of your parts, your health, your sexuality, your power, and your expression, so that you can finally truly own yourself. I want to ignite in you that inner knowing and the pulsing vitality that lives beneath your disempowerment, disconnection, and resentment, so that you can audaciously, courageously, and playfully alchemize your struggle into the specific pleasure of who you are. This is Reclamation Radio. Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I am Dr. Kelly Brogan. And what I love about my containers is that the women I attract always have some audacious questions to ask me. So it's my intention for the musings that I share on these topics to grow the permission field of what's possible, and also to offer relatable reframes that can jailbreak you from your victim stories. So you might notice that I'm a bit more familiar and free when I'm answering these questions in our private spaces. So take a listen, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to submit your questions to me in my membership Vital Life Project. This question is from Mary. I've been with an amazing man for almost 6 years, and we've both been married before, but the idea of getting married again doesn't appeal to us. He is supportive and generous, and he has helped me raise my 2 children. I'm also wildly attracted to him, and we have an amazing sex life, yet I also have the feeling, does he love me enough? Verbal affirmations are not his love language, and I should be okay with that because I've had many men who told me that they love me and the relationship was horrible. I have anxious attachment, though, that is under control. It's more of an existential question. Am I lovable enough? Am I good enough? Or is this just part of the human experience to have some level of self-doubt? Yes, it is part of the human experience. And I would say that your lack of interest in marriage and this question have a strong relationship. And so I'm going to posit what might be, I don't know, like a little triggering. I don't know. You're a big girl, so I know you can handle it. So perspective that is like percolating inside of me. And I'm going to point you also in the direction of a couple of resources. So what is the point of having this kind of relationship, right? We talked about it a little bit earlier. If the intention and the goal is to cultivate intimacy, to alleviate existential aloneness. And I don't know, in your case, maybe it's to have experiences of ecstatic sexual union and erotic experience together. Maybe it's to experience tribe, right? And family, that sense of belonging. I would encourage anyone who is in a relationship or looking for a relationship to get clear on what they imagine becomes available from and through that relationship that they cannot have just on their own, right? So whatever is available through that relationship, if it is something that you are transactionally getting, then there is going to probably be a performative pressure. So in the relationships that I've been in, my performer, as I call it, although I have many, I have like at least 3 major parts that are performer responsible, right? One's responsible for how I look physically, like in terms of beauty and attractiveness. Ones that are responsible for how unique and interesting I am and erudite I sound at any given moment. Ones that are responsible for my wit and flirtatious energy and like charisma. And then ones that are responsible for my like, spiritual gravitas. I mean, it's just like, it's exhausting. It's like fucking exhausting circus of like regulators inside of me. And we all have this, and we have brought these performers into relationship. And the performer is necessarily focused on the other, but not in a devotional way, in a neurotic way, in a way that is meeting a need that can be updated and met in a totally different way. The safety and protection and sense of self-possession that you can confer to yourself can really allow that performer to relax and no longer be necessary. So recognizing that the performer is an intimacy sabotaging part is important, because it means that you can't attune to you. And as a woman in the relationship, that's actually your job. in my opinion, of course, like in polarity dynamics, like you are responsible for attuning inward to you. When you are, let's say, in a submissive position with a dominant man in a sexual scene, the submissive is responsible for attuning to themselves and channeling and expressing whatever it is that they are feeling. That's actually their number one responsibility. If that submissive is focused on the experience of the dom, the contract is broken, right? The polarity is disturbed, and what might otherwise be possible in terms of, flow state and transcendence is no longer. The ecstasy is not available. So if your job is attuned to you and your experience, if you're in the performer trying to read and strategize and guess how pleasing you are to your mate. Now, obviously this is natural. Okay. And we're here to mature this. So if you're out there in his business, you are not only not experiencing the actual relationship as it's happening. So what the fuck is the point? But you're actually interfering with your role and therefore what is possible through the relationship. Now, I would make the argument that absent marriage, it is very, very difficult to cultivate the containment and the sense of investment and devotion to, what's sometimes called the egregore, to the third entity, to the marriage, right? That becomes possible when you commit in that way. When you commit in that way, you are both devoted to the marriage, theoretically anyway, right? So you are, remember what I said earlier, now you are fundamentally on the same fucking team. It is the end of victim consciousness, possibly. Because when you close all of the doors and you know that this person is not, of course they do, I've been divorced twice, like you know that this person is not leaving. If you close all of the doors, then you can actually be transparent. Then you can actually show who you are. Then the performer can relax because the person isn't leaving. If you know that they could just assess you in real time, judge you and peace out at any moment, of course you're not going to be real. Of course you're not going to be transparent. And of course your performer is going to be active. So, I am a big believer. I recorded a podcast called Reclamation of Courtship. I highly recommend Rabbi Manis Friedman's work. He has a couple books. He's got a ton of YouTubes and a course even that I've done. And I don't agree, with all his stuff, which is true about pretty much anyone I mention. That's going to be true. But I'm very good at curating and picking and choosing like the aspects that I do. And he's really helped me to understand what I didn't understand when I engaged in legal marriage before. I just did another interview by popular demand with Omer Pani that's going to come out soon, also on the subject of sacred marriage. And he calls it the 7 chakra marriage. And there is so much potential here in your union. And I'm not saying like, oh, you should both think about it. However, just have compassion for what it is that you're dealing with as a symptom of the lack of marriage, right? Like as a symptom of the lack of that level of commitment and the closing of those doors. It's very, very challenging to allow your performer to relax in those circumstances. And that's okay, but I think it's true. And I think it's true. And by the way, like I will never get legally married again. I'm complete with that system. And I also am a huge believer in the commitment ceremony. A lot of people are doing common law marriages or even creating like common law trusts together. There are other ways, to engage the same energy without, even if you're interested in a religious ceremony, there are other ways to do it without the invocation of bond trading and securities. Here's another question on the topic of relationships from Monica. I'm curious what your take is on consensual non-monogamy, open relationships, polyamory, and the whole range of having multiple ongoing sexual and romantic relationships. I've been curious about it myself, and I brought it up to my husband, who seems very threatened by it. From what I've read and seen from friends, it seems like it can be a powerful path towards personal growth, self-awareness, and spiritual development as they embrace their sexual attraction to multiple people rather than pretend that as soon as they have committed to a partner, they have no desire for physical intimacy with anybody else. To me, it feels quite natural, but there are so many taboos about it in our society. What are your thoughts? I want to offer like an extensive and heartfelt caveat, which is that I am certainly not an expert on this matter. I'll tell you a bit about my trajectory and that I am a believer, as should be obvious, that everybody knows what is best for them and that there is no such thing as like the right path for growth. And the only carve out I would offer is that in my experience, doing something like VMR, where you have an experience of discipline around your lifestyle and personal self-care, and specifically your relationship to food, is one of the most powerful ways to get in touch with your intuition, right? So beyond that, who knows what is best for you? And that freedom, to trust your impulses and to know that there's something interesting here for you is part of that reconnection to the self, if you want to call it higher self. So the fact that this is coming up as interesting. So like what I hear you doing in this question is what I always do, which is like validating your interest, right? So you're like, it doesn't make sense that we would be attracted to only one person, right? So you're recruiting like almost like litigator, like evidence for why this is a valid interest. But I would say stay with the very raw impulse and really explore that, like play out scenarios and scenes in your mind and find your turn on in this space. Like, what is it about this concept, this framework, this paradigm that feels like it is calling forth a part of you that hasn't had much exposure or airtime or attention, and limit, the sort of justifications, because there's a self-abandonment there. And I do it regularly, which is why I know. So I will share, my very biased, based on my lived experience, perspective, again, with that caveat that there's a reason that this is calling to you. And it's either because, like, if I could be really reductionistic about it, it's either because there is growth, expansion, and dimensions of yourself that you're going to meet, particularly because it is taboo, right? So there might be something that is eroticized in this space of multiple partners that stems directly from an incomplete dimension of your childhood. And that literally couldn't be completed in a monogamous dyad. And that's why for you, to me, it's not taboo, right? Like polyamory is so basic bitch at this point. Like I'm like, oh, like it's a thing, right? So, but for you, it seems to be in that terrain of eroticized woundology, if I want to call it that. So what that would mean is that when you play out these scenarios and you identify what turns you on about it, like what is a dream or a fantasy that you have, you're going to make contact with some aspect of you that wasn't allowed to be, or that wants more attention from your childhood. I mean, that's what a lot of our sexual preferences are about. That opportunity for completion and for visiting with what otherwise would be very alive in the taboo realm that can be brought into consensual choice, as you're saying. So it's either that, or there's something that you're avoiding when it comes to the intimacy that you could cultivate with your partner. So in my long and winding romantic history, I had a window where I thought that I was aligned with polyamory, and I thought that it was, the most libertarian, like romantic expression, right? So live and let live. I'm going to do whatever I want as long as I'm not harming anyone, as long as everybody's consenting. And I don't want to say no to whatever the universe puts in my path. And that window coincided with the period I was in many ways forestalling, not only my first divorce, but actually the inner work that I would begin in 2016. That inner work began when I chose a monogamous container with my last partner. And I chose that basically under duress. And the choosing of that monogamous container without any intentionality around this was the beginning of my deepest window of inner child work, shadow work, personal work that began in 2016. And essentially, I put some sort of bow on it 6 months ago. And that would not have occurred if I was still able to source little hits of connection, self-concept, self-worth, self-validation, self-justification from other men. So I learned firsthand what a very strictly monogamous, including like zippering up my sexual energy because of my partner's then sensitivities. You know what I mean by that, right? Like where I would like use my sexual energy, like with a colleague to give him the impression that maybe one day, somehow, some way he could have sex with me, right? And when I had no intention of that, I left that open. And my partner was rightly sensitive to that. And his sensitivity, I chose to work with, and I chose to learn how to shut that down. And it was devastating to my inner energetics because I no longer had that way of stabilizing myself, of making sure I secured sexual attention. It's very subtle, right? From all of the men in my life, so that I knew that they were attracted and interested, but I also was in control of not letting anything happen that I didn't want to happen. Of course, that is a strategy. And that strategy stems from fear of men. That's what I've learned and what I have concluded. Whereas, you know, clear and clean boundaries, knowing that my sexual energy is mine to open and close at will, and it's not just like a default strategic connection, has been game changing for me. And it required that I go to the roots of this fear. And that took me many years. And we do this in all sorts of different ways. Like we sexually strategize with people who aren't our partners all the time. And, you know, men do it. They source from other women. Women do it in various ways, including pretending that they're not sexual, right? Like you're just like the buddy, you're just the friend. We have our way of learning how to feel safe with the opposite sex. And it's not conscious usually until it is. So for me, I now see that polyamory for me was an avoidance strategy, because I believe that the monogamous crucible is the most powerful technology there is for humanity at this time. And obviously that's all that I, can speak from is my experience. And many of you probably know I'm a huge fan of David Deda's work. And, he talks about like what high level mastery is required to manage the energy, not only of your partner, let's say as a man, right? So he speaks as a man. So he's like, I can barely remain conscious if my woman looks at another man, let alone if she has multiple other partners and their energies are in her energy body and I am managing that, right? So he doesn't like openly advocate for monogamy, but he talks about how you want to get that down, right? You want to get that down foundationally first. Laura Doyle wrote a book I've mentioned several times to many of you called Surrendered Wife. And she wrote a more recent book called Empowered Wife. And I guess she thought the other one was like not a good look for, for women to be reading. I actually think it's a better title, personally, the first one. But she's onto something. This woman is onto something. And the reason that I know is the same reason that I know I'm onto something with VMR is because of the outcomes. So she has testimonials of women who were in really fucked up marriages, like actually even frankly physically abusive, like involving restraining orders and all sorts of stuff. And they turned these marriages around. The women did. They turned them around and they found the depths of what these dynamics could offer because of what she calls the 6 intimacy skills. And it has a lot of overlap with Deda's work and others. It has a lot to do with polarity consciousness, right? So she doesn't call it that, but it's coming into your lane. And it's understanding that there is a way to interact as a woman with your man that serves you. And it seems like it's just philanthropic, right? Like it's just altruistic, like it's just serving him, but it actually serves what you want out of this man. And otherwise, like get off the fence, right? You want to be with him? You don't want to be with him. If you want to be with him, this is at least, again, like I'd like to see somebody else's, like some other marriage counselors, like testimonials, right? And I don't know. I am a believer in, what she teaches, and it's very simple. It's very basic. I talk about this more extensively, like in a lot of places, but in my early podcasts on ending the war with men. And it's essentially like how to show your partner, your man, respect. And what does that look like? And that it essentially looks very different than helping him, live his life better than he already knows how to live it. And micro advising him and generally controlling him. And so all of that is to say that if you want to identify whether the interest in polyamory is a strategy to avoid deeper intimacy with your partner, then it might be worth exploring, like reading the book, basically. It might be worth exploring how many of the tenets in this book are already in operation in your dynamic, or what could be optimized there. Because the reclamation of eros in the marital dyad is highly possible once this polarity, it's magnets, right? Once the magnets are charged properly. And then you might find that your interest, it seems complicated, right? It seems like messy and complicated, and like managing one relationship is intense. Now, that said, I'm also, as many of you know, have been learning about people in the BDSM world. And there's a lot of scene play that involves multiple people and partners. And, it could also be a culture within which you could lightly explore, like bringing one other person into the dynamic in a specific role for a specific purpose, maybe even just to explore whatever comes up for you with the multiple partner thing. Now, obviously a lot of polyamory is one-on-one. It's not like a group situation. In fact, probably mostly, right? So that's sort of like a little bridge maybe between the two. And I find that that's can be a very conscious and intentional and consensual way to bring your partner into what it is that you're wanting to explore, because you can't leave these things unexplored. It's just a matter of how you do it. Are you going to do it in your mind's eye? Are you going to do it in a structured scene? Are you going to do it in a lifestyle? And what is the best timing? Is it now, right now, tomorrow, or is it after you've really committed, to the partner and chosen the partner that you're actually with? Because it may be that, there's something that you're avoiding there that is, you're not going to find fulfillment elsewhere, if that's what it is that you're looking for. And finally, here is one from Daniela. How does one support their partner when they aren't interested in self-growth? I would love to explore the idea of experiencing containment with my husband and to make my man bigger, which is an Omrapani reference, in order to experience a different way of relating. But I'm nervous that the submissive part might keep me where I'm at, feeling unseen, unheard, and feeling small. So this is where the concept of getting off of the fence is so essential for us as women, because when you are in active rejection of your partner, but you're staying, that's actually abuse. I mean, not to be dramatic, but it is. And it's aggression at best. Okay. And to really go in, like on a soul level, have a conversation, and really visit with, honestly, do you want to be with this person? In Family Constellation and in Maureen Selene's book, she talks about this. One of the 3 yeses of healthy romantic love is that you choose your partner exactly as they are. So like if he never changes, are you down? Right? Never. What if he never ever grows or changes one bit ever? And there are many of us who, in less than ideal partnerships would still on a deep knowing level say, yeah, I'm here for it. I choose this person, like the personhood of this being, right? Like I choose you. Once you get into like legal lawful stuff, you realize what the word person means and you can never use it again. Normally. So that's a little caveat. But anyway, if you're staying, okay, because otherwise, pull your big girl panties up and leave. Like actually do that. Liberate this person and liberate yourself. Because if you're choosing to stay, then there is, in my opinion, if you want a certain kind of dynamic, right? Like if you want like a buddy-buddy egalitarian, like best friend, like we do life together, like sexless thing, that's not what I'm talking about here. That's probably like not difficult to achieve with the right kind of compatibility, right? But if what you want is like a passionate relationship with a man who is different from you, and you want to have the feeling as a woman of what it is to be led and guided and held in safety and contained, and then you want to be the muse to this artist, right? I recently interviewed Kimmy Inch for the podcast, and she talked about Dom and sub that way, right? Like the Dom is the one in charge of the creation, right? Like of whatever it is that's being like whatever's unfolding, and the sub is the muse, right? So if that appeals to you, that experience of co-creation, To me, it's like, got to be what I came here for, right? But if that appeals to you, then it's not complicated, like what needs to happen. And the leap of faith is exactly what you're referencing, which is, I am going to trust this man to come into proper orientation towards me when I get my shit straight. And you're not going to micromanage that process. You're not going to check in and ask on the status of how things are going, right? Like, you are the one who decides how the relationship is going to go. That's what I believe. And that you have this power. I always thought that it was the couple, right? And I was like trying to drag my partners into couples therapy and, find the right person. And I remember my coach, Whitney, she would say, let's just start with you. And that felt unfair, right? It was like, I'm the one who is experiencing the dissatisfaction, and, I'm the one who's doing all this work. And as we do as women, right? Like, which is in many ways a extension of some sort of self-rejection on a very fundamental level. And now you're saying, like, I'm the one who's responsible for saving the relationship. Like, this is too much. I want to do it together. I get that. And what I am seeing, again, especially through Laura Doyle's work, is that no, he actually doesn't have to do anything, because if you chose the right partner for you, which you probably did, right, on some level, unless it's clear that you should leave, then you have all of the power to bring it into its organized polarity, and he will naturally and natively come into that role. He does not need, this is what I started to intuit. It's like, men actually don't need to be taught, like, how to be men. We need to get out of the way. And there's a good reason that we're in the freaking way. Okay. So when we are ready to get out of the way, and when we are ready to, like, I want to say, like, feed them the feminine energy, which is basically respect and, admiration and appreciation, trust, and then maybe creative energy, right? Play. When we can feed them that, and when we focus on ourselves. So that's the permission slip I've been given for years, right? Is focus on yourself, your self-care. What's interesting to you? What color are you going to paint your nails? What are you going to have for breakfast, right? What interesting thing are you going to look at or read or, research? Like, focus on you. Stay in your lane. Those two things happen, your relationship will change. And he does not need to be interested in self-growth. In fact, I actually have started to wonder if it's part of what I'm now seeing as the new age psyop, that we have been encouraging men, to get into self-exploration and take all these courses and go talk to all these therapists and do all these ceremonies and whatever. And like, probably, I have no idea, but probably what men need is just to be around other men, right? Like, moving their bodies, figuring out how to be in their bodies. And they need to be around women that make them bigger. And then everything's going to work out. And, what we need as women is to find safety within ourselves. And that's the hardest work. It's the hardest work. And not exclusively, like, not like we should feel okay being like an island unto ourselves, but we learn to trust our own navigation, like our own internal navigation, our own compass, our own decisions, and to know that if we choose to stay, it's actually right. We are safe then, right? And if we choose to go, that's actually best. That, like, the inner husband, right, is trustworthy and reliable, and that he follows through and his word means something, right? That when that comes online, you have a capacity to be with your own emotions without needing your partner to grow them or change them or fix them or whatever. And you just sort of exit that dysfunctional way of relating. So I know that it takes a huge leap and it almost feels, it's like when people criticize me publicly and say that I victim shame, right? It almost feels like salt in the wound. It almost feels like it's only going to get worse if I reflect to him that he's okay, right? Or that he's like doing anything right he's going to get the wrong impression and he's going to stop trying. Well, that's not how it works. Right? Like, that's just not how it works. People thrive when they are seen for their best intentions, and people thrive when they are respected and trusted and appreciated. And if you want to try the experiment, which she advises you don't let him know you're doing, you'll know pretty quickly. Like, I have one close girlfriend of mine. She's said that she'll come on my podcast and talk about her outcomes, who's been in a marriage. She's hyper brilliant. She's a collaborator of mine and a friend. Brilliant. One of the most, if not the most competent women I know. A lot of strong masculine traits. And she's got a great husband. And she read this book and it changed her life from everything I could tell. She put some of these practices, like basically shutting the fuck up. Okay. That's like the number one practice she put into place when she saw that she could tell him how to do something a little better, or what time to do this, or did he do that yet? All of that. Duct tape, right? So she just shut up and stopped doing that. And, a couple of other things, to basically express like positive reinforcement around the things that he was doing that she appreciated, right? Like showing appreciation and reflecting like what it is that he actually was doing right. So he has these wins, right? Omer Pani calls it like the green light, red light. So that men have a green light and they have a red light, and you're either turning one on or you're turning the other on. It's really that simple. And it completely changed their sex life. It changed their dynamic in the household, changed their dynamic as parents. So, at the risk of sounding like I am her unpaid marketing team, I think there's something to it. And also, I like the overlap of all of these different teachers and teachings. But suffice it to say, there is a leap. And it's a leap of faith. And the leap is, it could get way worse. I could feel really vulnerable. I could feel like I'm actually reinforcing and approving of that which I know is wrong and not working, or it could get way better. So you got to just take that risk. So people love to ask me questions, and I love to ask questions of others because inquiry is play. But some of my interviews and answers are too hot to handle for Reclamation Radio. So in my membership Vital Life Project, I have created a private podcast that gets delivered to wherever you listen to podcasts, where I answer your questions that arise because of my provocative subject matter. And I also share interviews that might otherwise be censored that I call the Sovereignty Series. So you'll get access to these private podcasts and a private chat by joining my membership Vital Life Project. I'll see you in there.